Hello, I'm Nick Terzo, and this is The Radical. My guest today is both a musician and visual artist. He and his band were mainstays of many Warped tours and signed to seminal punk label Epitaph Records. While the band continues, he has also gone on to a successful career as a children's book illustrator. His book collaborations with Dave Eggers, Mac Barnett, and the Decemberists Colin Malloy have all been widely recognized. We'll chat about the East Bay punk scene, the Match's unusual career, second chances, and creativity both sonically and visually. My guest is musician Shawn Harris of the Matches. Coming up, my conversation with Shawn Harris. Hey, Shawn, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to speak to you. I feel like I know you from afar through a mutual couple of friends, but it'll be better to get to know you for real here. So I'm excited.
Yeah. What are your preconceived notions about me?
Super creative,
Okay.
Willing to experiment.
Yes. Yeah. Check. Okay.
And the curious part of this conversation for me will be, the band when it was in its infancy stage and making studio albums and being creative, kind of where you got in the public perception versus when you broke up and then kind of started doing reunions and you have this unusually large following still. I find that really interesting, the line between those two. And, it's a tribute maybe to what you built during that time that wasn't as recognized by a larger public in a way. So anyway.
Yeah. Or maybe there's also the view that potentially we just flooded the supply and that maybe we've been working with a similar demand all of these years, but we just kind of incessantly toured and showed up and were in people's faces too much. I guess you have to make some music or art of enough quality that people have the nostalgic spot to actually want to come back to it. And I think that that's an especially tricky thing to foster in the genre of music that we were known for playing, which was pop punk. I certainly don't have much nostalgia for it.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of saw our band as sort of a bookmark to want to come back to. Now coming up on 20 years later, we can still book a show at the Fillmore and sell it out. It's kind of cool.
That's amazing. And the band we're talking about is the Matches, which was Shawn's band, which formed in high school, right?
Yeah, we were a high school band. They were actually a band in middle school, but I met them at a Catholic high school in Oakland called Bishop O'Dowd.
And with the band, I have to say, you guys, you had this kind of medium level of notoriety, or your fans are definitely hardcore and into you. The thing I thought you guys did the best, though, were your actually your album titles.
Okay.
So I want to go through a couple. I mean, it's the best album titles ever in the history of music, I'm convinced. So the first one is Yvonne Dahl Killed the Locals.
Yes.
And we know what that, we'll talk about what that is.
Okay.
Your next one was Decomposer. And then my favorite is A Band in Hope.
Yes. So. That was our throw in the towel record.
And I said A Band in Hope, not A Band in Hope. So,
yeah. Well, it kind of started as one and it ended up clearly being the other meaning, right?
Yeah. Those were amazing titles. So
Thank you.
And the first one that deals with your first name and someone owning the copyright on it. Is that what that referred to?
Yeah, there was we used to be called the Locals when we were in high school. There was a band in Chicago called Yvonne Dahl and the Locals. And it was Yvonne, like Yvonne, a woman's name. And so we kind of turned her into a Eastern European villain by turning her name into a three-part, Baron von whatever. Yvonne Dahl, basically creating this sort of semi-fictional villain for our fans to kind of rally against. It was never pointed at the specific band, but our fans did know where it came from, and hopefully they didn't get any hate mail or anything.
You guys kind of never fit a certain. I mean, look, you're punk pop. Yes.
I like how you've inverted that and put the punk first. It sounds cooler.
Well, that's what I think it is. I think the punk leads in certain.
I do. I mean, I think,
I would say the same of Green Day. So
yeah. No, there was a certain point when I think people realized, if we just flip this, then we're not embarrassed by the title anymore.
Yeah. So, but you guys tried other genres. You kind of, how do I say it? Your music maybe didn't fit in one box and didn't have a theme necessarily. Was that intentional is the question, or was that just being young?
To be quite honest, I was never like a pure punk pop or pop punk head myself. I was kind of more of a power pop, like, Weezer, the Clash, Replacements. I mean, Rancid was a big local band, Green Day band, and Warped Tour was like this force. Like, if you could get on Warped Tour, you could actually ostensibly form a career at the time that we were coming up, just from getting on that one tour for a summer. So I think when we were recording our first album, I mean, we were kids going to Warped Tours and stuff, but like at that point, like we were also like Eminem was playing Warped Tour. Genre was like already sort of schisming and going all over the place. We did play with a lot of pop punk bands that were very like indicative of the kind of emo pop punk scene, but we were always kind of outliers, but accepted into that scene and appreciated being accepted and taken on tour by the likes of Yellow Card or something. But there were very little similarities even between our most pop punk record and a Yellow Card record, I think. Right. So yeah.
And the East Bay scene at that time, I mean, I suppose that Rancid and Green Day maybe were 5 or 6 years ahead of you guys. Explain the scene at that time.
I was too young to be going to Green Day or Rancid shows before they were commercial hits. I was in middle school when those records were coming out on the radio, but I was going to see them play, Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. I was going to see them play in front of 20,000 people, 10,000 people, you know what I mean? So it was a big thing, but then, it kind of filtered down. We found a bunch of local bands that were, either cut from that same mold. There was a band called Link 80 that was pretty influential on us in the early days. One of the members of that band went to my high school. So I immediately was like, oh, there's a path that I can potentially follow. What is he doing? The scene that we had to kind of carve out for ourselves, we tried to get shows at the Gilman, which is, where Green Day and Rancid, Operation Ivy, and those bands were famous for kind of coming out of that building. Even we were like Catholic school kids. We weren't quite hunk enough to like really interest their booking agent, in our late teens, and we kept on trying and it never quite worked. And then we found this venue. It was sort of a, no offense to the owner, Brian, who I'm still friends with, but it was sort of like a failing business. It was called iMusicCast. It was in Oakland on Telegraph Avenue, and not too far from the Gilman. They set it up to be a webcasting studio. And this is like, really early streaming days. We're streaming right now, but yeah.
I think I visited there with maybe your manager.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that sounds right. They kind of set the whole thing up to be this great idea where bands could play to a global audience from one location. However, they realized pretty quickly that they needed to get people in the room and tickets paid to come in and make it look like a real live show, and nobody was drawing for them. So we actually were able to convince them to let some kids that were, I think our drummer was still in high school when we booked our first show there. We convinced them to let us be promoters and do our own show. Had our parents work at the door, because just to get the overhead down, because, they were like, okay, here's our security cost for the night. And we're like, there's no way that we're going to sell enough tickets to make that. Like, can we bring security? Can we bring a ticket taker? And we just like pulled all of our favors, begged all of our friends at school to come, and actually got, I think, I think the break even point that we had to hit for them to allow us to do a second show was like 100 tickets. And we got like 103 people in there on the first show. So we're like, we get to do it again. And the next month we were like, okay, we brought everybody we could at our school. We've got to like get other kids in here. And we just started going around to all the local high schools, figuring out when school was getting out and running through the halls, just throwing flyers into classrooms that were like being taught at the time, just, flyers snowing down in hallways. And we just really like made a nuisance of ourselves, but it worked. We started trading shows with, other bands kind of are similar size around the country that were doing national tours already. So like the Plain White Tees was an early band that we traded shows with. We traded shows with Sugar Cult and Zebrahead, and the Real Big Fish came down and played our venue. It was pretty cool. And that's how we got on the radar of Epitaph. And then we became like a legit band from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Were all three of those studio albums Epitaph albums?
The first one that you mentioned, Yvonne Dahl Killed the Locals, was we recorded ourselves.
Was the major label thing good for you? I mean, that experience. I mean, I call them a major. I mean, they're a major indie, right? But in your scene, they're definitely like a major in that particular genre.
Yeah. It was the majorest indie for sure.
Was it a good experience?
It really kind of validated us on a national level. We kind of caught the tail end of the Punkorama compilations being influential and kind of looked to by kids as sort of a definitive catalog of what was coming out next season. Yeah, that was great. And they offered a lot of clout for us to get on Warped Tour multiple times and to be able to kind of pitch larger bands like a Yellow Card or like a Biffy Clyro in England to take us on tour because we had support,
Right. Well, you basically become, I mean, those are nice godfathers to have, right? You got Epitaph and you become a somewhat regular Warped Tour performer, right?
Yeah.
Did you do much international touring or not?
We did a lot of international touring. Yeah. One of our early connections was a band called Zebrahead. They were playing with Papa Roach, and I had never heard of either of these bands. I think we went to see, I think the headlining band was this band called Remy Zero. That was,
I remember them.
Yeah. I think they had a song on the radio that I really liked, but they were more popular for the guy dating some famous model at the time. It was a really weird show. But yeah, I saw Zebrahead there, and I loved them. They're like sort of pre-Linkin Park mixture of like punk rock and hip hop was interesting to me at 12 or 13 or whatever I was. Yeah.
I mean, and you guys almost caught the last wave though of almost like an artist developing as they tour, as musicians, right? I mean, you became way better musicians, right?
So Zebrahead was the Linkin Park of Japan. They were huge in Japan, and they took us to Japan like 3 times. And after all the touring we did, and we did some, we played some pretty big shows. We did like, basketball stadiums with Yellow Card and stuff. But like of all the touring I've done, I've never had a more like, whoa, we're rock stars experience than touring Japan with Zebrahead, which is like, they remain to be like a very like underground, like, you remember that weird band that rapped over punk rock like for a couple years there? They were huge in Japan. And so we were able to keep going back to Japan, and England and Europe were always really good for us. Our first tour ever, we went to Bosnia and Herzegovina. We kind of fudged our way into being sort of like an American band that was booked sort of diplomatically to sort of patch up American and Bosnian sentiments to some degree. It was like an outreach concert that was put together over there, and our drummer's dad was like on a board that he was basically an American guy on a board with a bunch of Eastern Europeans that were wondering if he had any connections with American bands, and he threw our name in a hat, and like they really thought we were coming over there. They really thought we were like Sum 41. And I remember that like my first Photoshop work was photoshopping a crowd in front of us, or like us onto a stage at a real show, and like submitting that as like, yeah, here's some of our shows. We had never played for more than 20 people at that point. And we got taken on the tour. We'd played for 30 people, and then all of a sudden we're playing to like 1,500 people in Sarajevo.
Nice one. Nice bluff on your part.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a big bluff.
So what's interesting is, as a band though, too, with you guys, is you kind of created like your own environment. I mean, meaning artwork, that you got kind of started on, which led to where you are today, and even designing your stage clothes, right? To that extent, or not?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a tailor.
Did you really?
Yeah, I mean, I still really like fashion. Doing a weird niche on streetwear stuff with like patches and printing shirts still, which is what the band stuff taught me.
Did you take the lead in both those things?
Right when we signed with Epitaph, I was trying to roll into the deal. I was trying to get like a branding connection with Hot Topic, where I could like have basically a clothing imprint that they would help me get into Hot Topic.
Hey, that was a good plan. Being now where you have 20 years plus to reflect on the band itself. I mean, how do you look at the music now? I mean, like when you have to do a reunion show like you guys tend to do, I assume you would have done some this year again, like you do around the holidays?
Yeah, we would have. I mean, we had a documentary come out about us this year. We actually played the opening of a documentary up in the Bay Area here in San Jose. And then everything shut down. Like the day after was when it was like, oh, this is really serious. We need to stay home. That was the last show I played in public. We've been doing Zoom events for the film premiere.
The film, I mean, this documentary is getting decent reviews, right? At a few festivals. Has it won some awards and all that?
Yes, from what I see, it's doing well. It's not my movie. It's me in it, and it makes me uncomfortable to watch. But like the fans and people are really enjoying it, and we've had a bunch of new people interested in the band through that. So that's cool.
So it's on like the indie kind of film circuit, right? Film festival circuit.
It's still doing premieres, and I think they're just stretching. All these festivals are just stretching premiere season until I don't know when. Everybody's just sort of like holding their breath right now, right? For maybe being able to do a real event.
What's the title of it?
It's called Bleeding Audio. I think the subtitle might be a film about the matches. I don't know.
So, I mean, on an average year, though, like, is this what you roll out every year? Is it the same shows, same venues? I mean, has that kind of become a pattern now for you guys? Are you doing more, less, the same?
We did a pattern of 10-year anniversaries for each of the 3 major records. I wrote a new record. We had plans to record, but now those are sort of by the wayside until there's a vaccine or we can safely congregate or whatever.
So, like, when you guys kind of, do I call it a hiatus, or do I say you guys actually broke up? I mean, which one was it?
No, we called it a breakup. Our fans called it a hiatus. So you might find some mixed information online.
I didn't see it online. That was just me being polite.
They were right. So. They were right as usual. Yeah.
So you broke up. And then what space are you in at that point? Like, what are you thinking? Like, how did you get into your next career, so to speak, as a visual artist and illustrator?
Well, by that time I was actually working full time as a visual artist. Like basically 90% of my income was visual art stuff. And then, the band was kind of like floundering and barely breaking even itself by that point.
Well, what I was going to say is when you kind of said you already had your visual art, your artist career going simultaneously to the band at the end, like what did that encompass? What was that? What were those projects? What were you working on?
I was doing album art for basically all the bands we were touring with. A lot of bands that saw like our tour posters and our shirts and our records said, "Oh, cool, can you do ours?" So I was just, that was my business card, if you will, was doing the matches stuff.
And so, I mean, your illustrator, as an illustrator and a visual artist, I mean, it takes off though. I mean, you do incredible like merchandise work for people, right? You do children's books. Let's talk about those a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, this transition into that. So
cool. Yeah.
I give you the floor. Tell me a little bit about that.
It was sort of a natural gradient. I kept getting jobs doing art for bands, but I was sort of like a guy that you call upon to do band work. But, as we got older and people that were part of the band world got jobs in other fields. A friend of mine, an old friend of mine, his wife became a picture book editor, and she knew me as an artist. I oftentimes worked in collage, and there was a brief for a book that had specifically requested I'd like to find a collage artist. So, that narrowed the field a little bit, and there was an opening for a non-picture book person to get a go at it, and I did some samples and got the job. And the author was a guy named Dave Eggers, very well-known New York Times best-selling author. It was an amazing first picture book gig to get. He was doing, I think, his second picture book. So he was, he writes novels and nonfiction for adults, but he was just sort of stepping into the picture book world there. And I managed to get that gig, and the book got a bunch of recognition, a bunch of awards.
What was the title of that book?
The book was called Her Right Foot.
Her Right Foot.
Yeah. Sort of an op-ed for kids about the Statue of Liberty and what she means to welcoming immigrants coming to America. That led to another book and another book and another book, and I was illustrating those
with Dave or with others. You mean with Dave?
I did 2 books with Dave, and then actually my next book, it was written by Colin Malloy, the singer of the Decemberists. Yep. He does picture books and middle grade novels. Anyway. I came across his radar via the Dave stuff and did a book with him. So I got to do a bunch of events with Colin Malloy this last year as well. I've got a couple graphic novels coming in the works right now, and a couple picture books that I also wrote. And like I said, it's so funny, like just connecting with all of these people that are like, I can't believe I was a fan of your band when I was 12, and now my 12-year-old is reading your stuff. Like, what is happening? It's kind of cool.
That's awesome. So how many books do you have under your belt at this point?
I've got 4 out, 2 more coming out this next year, and then 2 more coming out the year after that. The interesting thing about the book industry, it's kind of like a really artist friendly version of the music industry, which isn't to say that there aren't artist friendly people in the music industry, right. But as a whole, the book industry is just very, very warm and favorable to the writers and illustrators, which I found so refreshing and nice. I'm like, really? This is the way it works? Like that's the royalty you want to give me? Okay, cool. Like I just started. You don't need to. Okay, cool. Up until this year, I was going on book tours. So instead of playing venues, then it's, playing bookstores and libraries. And when I say playing, I mean reading books and drawing on easels. But it's fairly similar. Like, you know how to work a crowd. You can kind of easily parlay that into getting 4-year-olds stoked and moshing.
That's incredible. And I mean, are the graphic novels like your own concepts and your own thing, or are you doing that in collaboration with someone?
It's a thing I'm doing with an old friend of mine, my oldest friend, this guy named Mac Barnett, and so he's the author and I'm the illustrator. But it's actually they came from the beginning of the shelter in place orders. All of a sudden, we noticed oh man, all of these parents are like, what do I do with these kids in my house? And these kids are like, help, I have no schedule. Everything changed so fast. And so immediately we started doing this. We called it a live cartoon. And it was sort of like a combination between collage and puppet show, but I would film it so it looked like an animated cartoon, but it was just sort of really crudely animated using kind of pop-up book and flip book concepts. But we would do it live over Zoom. It got really popular, and so we ended up called The First Cat in Space Ate Pizza. We got approached by a few publishers, and now we're doing it as books.
I'll wrap this up so you can get on with your creative day as you like to. So, in summary, I'm going to say the Matches have really great album titles. You should go back and listen to their music. If I know they have diehard fans, so apparently there's an album that's been maybe recorded and maybe it'll come out after 2020 goes away.
That might be the premiere of that announcement. I don't know. Yeah. I know you don't do the flashy announcements or anything, but yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love a premiere. Well, wait till Pablo gets his hands on it. There'll be a flashy announcement. Trust me. Watch my social channels. And then, you have these children's books and this illustration work you've done that's just been incredible. And I look forward to these novels you're doing, based on something that was just kind of a giving back to people. And it turned into something, which is really nice. So one last question before I let you go, and that is, what are you currently listening to that's incredible?
Oh, cool. Good question. Let's see. First one that comes to mind is Micaiah McCraven, a jazz guy that records everything live and then goes back in his studio and like collages all of the live recordings back together. So it's like an in the box modern album, but with pieces of live jazz. And I think that I've just been listening to live albums. Like, I always hated live albums. I was like, well, they're just like a crummier sounding version of like, who cares about live albums? And then now that I've been in my house for, 9 months, I'm like, just the sound of a guitar player, like breaking a string, or like someone just like dropping the beat, like not on the one at all, or like, somebody heckling the band. Like, all of these things are incredibly nostalgic and I'm just loving right now. So yeah, live albums.
That's a really good selection, because people are missing that from their lives right now. So that's an interesting choice.
So nice. Yeah.
That's awesome, my friend. Well, thank you for doing this. I love your energy, and I love how you've taken your creativity down so many different paths. It's impressive.
Right on. Thank you for having me, Nick.
My pleasure. And at some point, I look forward to seeing the matches live at one of their spectaculars.
Yeah, hopefully we can get there.
That'd be awesome. Thank you for being on, Shawn. Stay safe. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening this week. To follow what's going on with this podcast, you can go to theradicalpod.com. Theradicalpod.com. You will find show notes and past episodes, and even a little swag there if you want a t-shirt or a hat. I would be honored if you'd subscribe at Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week.